Hi, everybody. Welcome to episode 2 of the Remembering Muizenberg series, which is in its second season. And when you think about how much can you talk about Muizenberg, well, believe it or not, a lot. Thank you to our speakers today, Farrell Hope speaking from none other than Wisconsin, as well as Hedy Davis speaking none other than from Johannesburg. I know you both. We spoke a little bit before. And again, thank you so much. This is all in honor of the centenary celebrations, which will be celebrated from December the 28th, 2023 until the 4th of January, 2024. It's 8 days of celebration. Just to give you an idea for those who are thinking, nah, don't want to come, or should I come, etc. We are going big. We're thinking double-decker open bus tours around around Muizenberg, going over Boyce Drive in a double-decker open bus as an example. We are going to be having dinners at the pavilion and maybe at the Herzl Hall as well, with close to 500 people, and events every single day, other than the public holiday, for 8 days. It's really going to be a it's going to be a spectacle. I imagine it's going to be living up the great days of Muizenberg that our speakers will speak a little bit about, but in the modern version of it. Everything from surfing with the rabbi, Akka, myself, and other people, and climbing up to the top of Muizenberg Peak and laying tefillin, and everything in between. We will be visiting the museum as well, the cemeteries, having a huge Shabbat, both in before Shabbat, after Shabbat, a musical concert. We're also going to get the Mass Theatre involved with a comedy show. So there's really a whole week of activities, and I encourage everybody, wherever you are in the world, if you are going to make a trip to Muizenberg, think about doing it at the end of this year. That's enough of my marketing pitch, but I do think it's going to be worth the time and the effort to get here. Obviously, I speak to the Cape Townians as well, who I know will be here, and the Johannesburgers come here en masse regardless. So that's what the end of the year looks like. Without further ado, Farrell Hope, thank you again for waking up early in Wisconsin. And I'm going to make you the spotlight, and please share whatever you wish about Muizenberg.
Thank you very much. I was very honored when you asked me to talk, Rabbi. I'm going to talk about remembering the old Muizenberg, my old Muizenberg, while welcoming the new. And there is a new. One thing I want to do before I start my talk, when I talk about my Muizenberg and my being in it and the things that I did, etc., and what it was like, I don't want you to think of this old gray-haired man wearing reading glasses here. I want you to think of the guy who actually did the things I'm going to talk about. And this is the guy, which is very different from the guy you see speaking to you today. Now, good whatever the time of the day is for you, Muizenbergers, ex-Muizenbergers, and wish you were Muizenbergers. I am perhaps not the best person to do this. My family, who came to South Africa at the turn of the century, only became part of the permanent Muizenberg scene when my grandparents moved from the Transvaal to Muizenberg in 1950, when I was 5. My parents followed. Although they didn't immediately move to Muizenberg, my mother and sister and I spent the entire summers at my grandparents' house at the corner of Cromer Road and Albertine Road, the heart of the older Jewish community in Muizenberg. And when I was 11, in Standard 5, we moved to Muizenberg ourselves. And I lived in Yarmouth Road, as did many of my lifelong friends. and later on Main Road across from the Mask Theatre, until my home left me when my parents emigrated to Canada when I was 18. I did not want to go and ended up taking digs in Rondebosch. So my Muizenberg was the Muizenberg of 1950 to 1963. From 5 to 18, my formative years, both as a child and a teenager, throughout my coming of age, and that is the Muizenberg I'm going to talk to you about.
Yet.
In 1963, the Muizenberg I knew was about to rapidly start disappearing, as places like Clifton became the new preferred beach resort. At 21 years of age, I went to visit my family in Montreal. My 52-year-old father was seriously ill and sent me a ticket. The report of his impending death was greatly exaggerated. We had to beat him to death with a stick at age 90. I was actually seated on the plane back to Cape Town when I decided I was not going back, and walked down the gangway and asked the immigration official if he could stamp my passport landed immigrant. And I never did go back until 2009, when my American wife, Peggy, bought us tickets as a surprise for our 10th anniversary. I wasn't keen to go back. With the advent of email, I had got in touch with many of my school friends. At least 4 of them were like brothers to me. A few had visited me in Montreal and Wisconsin, where I now live. And 5, Barry Lockitch, Ronnie Derman, Barry Blumenthal, Mervyn Rosenberg, and Roger Haylett were like brothers to me. I only made contact with Roger in the middle 1990s, after not seeing him since 1965. And when he came to visit me for a month, he gave me the greatest compliment I've ever had or will ever have. He had served 2 tours in Angola as a major in the Cape Town Highlanders infantry regiment. And he said to me, "I am closer to you than I am to any of the men with whom I served in combat." Such are the bonds we formed in Muizenberg. So why wasn't I keen to go back? Because as John Steinberg said, you can't go home again. Heraclitus said, "No man ever steps in the same river twice, for it's not the same river, and he's not the same man." But Alan Alda put it best in the title of his book, "Never Stuff Your Dog." When his father was young, he had a dog he dearly loved. And when it died, he had it stuffed. So Alan grew up with a stuffed dog sitting in the corner of his living room. When his father died and he was going through old photographs, lo and behold, one of his father as a young man with the dog. And the dog looked nothing like the stuffed dog. So by stuffing the dog, the father did not only not get it back, but he spoiled the memory. My Muizenberg was a magical place. I believe anyone who didn't grow up in Muizenberg has been deprived. In my memory, it still existed exactly as I remembered it. Everyone was still as I last saw them in the late 50s and early 60s, and the town was unchanged. The new pavilion hadn't even been built yet, and the snake park still existed. I didn't want to see it as it had surely changed, and thus ruin the memory which I wanted to keep and savor. And I knew what would not be waiting for me there, my youth. I have been lucky. My retained self-images of myself at 19. In my mind's eye, I picture myself as 19. When I walk past a store window and glance at it, I get a terrible shock looking at the old man reflected back at me. Who the hell is that? I didn't want Muizenberg to become that store window. I wanted to retain my Muizenberg untarnished. Did my magical Muizenberg survive the visit? Not fully. I knew the Muizenberg I was showing my wife Peggy was not my Muizenberg and could never be to her. I'm not going to go into the history of how it was the best beach resort in the British Empire, or how that great chronicler of the British Empire, Rudyard Kipling, visited it and wrote about it. Nor am I going to list the great characters who peopled it you will all remember. I'm going to talk about my Muizenberg and what it meant to me, and I will touch on some aspects that are not so good. As we talk about its wonders and look through it at rose-colored glasses, we owe it to ourselves to also remember and express regret for the things that weren't so nice. I also didn't prepare any pictures except one, other than the one I've already showed you, because A, I am lazy, and B, I hope to stir you to remember your own experiences, not mine, and to conjure them up from your own remembrances. We lived in Minaloo Court for the 6 months I spent there in Standard 2. Many people we all know lived there. My grandparents, Avram and Hotka Rosenberg, before they moved to Cromer Road. Maya and Fanny Lewis, Mrs. Navius, the owner, her daughter's family, whose eldest son, Aubrey Schneider, was in my class at school. I heard last week that he has just passed away in Vancouver. Today, my Muizenberg is peopled with ghosts, but they still live on for me. My sister Valerie Hope is married to a Muizenberg Quackquay boy, Leon Sloman, and both are still alive, living in Toronto. Leon's mother, Rosa Sloman of Royal Road, passed away just before New Year's Day 2000 at 103 years of age. And her last words were, that's just missing by a day or two, having lived in 3 centuries. And her last words were, I don't want to die. Neither do I. I remember the big things about my adolescent years were my friends and scouts. The troop was called the 2nd Muizenberg Jewish. Although when my father became scoutmaster, when at 16 I decided I was leaving, he removed the Jewish from the name. That discrimination was utterly contrary to the Scout oath. I loved Scouts. It was a major part of my life until 16 years of age. Meetings were held in the old wooden house lived in by the caretaker, Mr. Kohler, at the corner of the road running to the footbridge. And also by the other troop in Muizenberg, the 1st Sea Scouts, who were all Christians. We found out in later years they never even knew of our troop's existence. When the building finally collapsed and we held our meetings at the Talmud Torah Hall on Wherry Road, I remember we were playing a game of British Bulldog one night in the hall, where one man, the Bulldog, stands in the middle and on a signal has to run across the room to the other side. The guy in the middle has to grab someone, lift him clear of the floor, after which he joins the man in the middle as a bulldog. The winner is the last guy who makes it across without being lifted off the floor. A fellow named Mike Davis, who I'm sure a lot of you will remember, was the last man to make the run. Everybody else was in the middle. He was 17, much bigger and stronger than the rest of us. He started his last run, scattering us like chaff. And just before he reached the wall, which was the one where the stage was, he turned his head back to see if anyone was gaining on him. And when he turned to look forward, it was too late. He was at the wall. His head drove through both sides of the wall into the room on the other side, punching holes through the sheetrock boards, but his shoulders stopped him. He staggered back, probably concussed, and was led to a chair to sit and recover. In the 64 years since, I have never seen another man put his head through a wall. The school was important in our life, and our Friday night shul and the holy days were the center of our social life. But there's not time to cover anything. Everything. The Talmud Torah Hall was critical to our social life and our educational religious life. Bar mitzvahs were held there, including mine. Run-of-the-mill mitzvahs were catered by Emden. The upper scale ones catered by Kravchik. Mine was catered by Emden. I still have a copy of my speech, which consisted mainly of thanking my grandfather for staying alive long enough to be there. He didn't survive it by much. It was also, by the way, I understand that Merle, who as we know is watching, is today the Kravchik, or better, of the Jewish community in Cape Town. The Talmud Torah Hall was where dances were held and where dancing lessons were given. We were at the age where many of us were just starting to dance, especially on the outside bop floor down on the lawns by the snake park. A snake pit, actually. I don't know why I say snake park always. It's a snake pit. And it was always where we could have interface with girls without shyness or embarrassment. After all, we were only learning to dance, weren't we? It was also where Cheder was held. And we had to attend every day after school. I stayed in the first grade for 7 years, with a primer reading Gad Yeled Gadol, Dan Yeled Katan, Tzipurim Yafeh. Because if I spent the time playing soccer in the field next to the Torah Hall, I considered I had attended. My reports used to show 38 days absent out of 42. And my dad didn't make a fuss because his had been no better. And I know my brothers, who is listening, Jackie, certainly weren't. I did attend the classes How to Sing Bar Mitzvah, which was a total waste of time because I can't carry a tune in a bushel basket, and all I did was yell it out, holler it out. An event I remember in Cheder was someone putting a thumbtack on the rabbi's chair. Urban Rosenberg saw the tack just as the rabbi was sitting down and leapt up and saved him from sitting in it by jerking the chair away. So the rabbi crashed to the floor, jumped up and yelled at Mervyn, get out, you shtick goy," and expelled him for 6 months. Mervyn will remember that. I haven't mentioned the beach yet, but we all know that was my Muizenberg's main attraction, right through childhood, through adolescence, through teenage life, into adulthood. Teenagers went to the snake pit and their parents and grandparents to the Balmoral beach, except my parents, who, to my great discomfort, always came and sat on the snake pit, severely cramping my style as a teenager. Rocky Beach was great fun too, to look for red bait and to catch octopi by sticking your hand in a hole and letting them cling to it. And as Ryan mentioned surfing, and apparently is a surfing rabbi, most people, we all love body surfing. Board surfing had not become popular yet. Spring tides would have us in the water all day, risking our necks as we surfed in between the bathing boxes. Most people played beach bats on the beach and touched rugby on the lawns, but not me. I was very poor at them. I liked playing bok-bok on the beach, though. The nightlife centered around the promenade, the prom, where you met people from all over Southern Africa, including Southern Rhodesia, now Zimbabwe, and Northern Rhodesia, now Zambia. I think the romances that blossomed into marriage, and today that includes cohabitation among the Jewish communities, initiated to a great degree at the beach, the promenade, and Sunday night concerts at the pavilion. We were the Muizenberg boys, but we had other groups we considered affiliated with us. Those were the Paul boys, the Worcester boys, the Rondebosch boys, the Sea Point boys, and the boys from the Rhodesias. Many had much more money to spend than us because they were only there for 2 or 3 weeks, but we were there for the duration of 3 months. But we had the tan. And of course, these towns also had their own groups of girls whom we got to know. Another great interest for me, and which absorbed a lot of my free time, was spelunking, caving, on Muizenberg and Lakeside Mountain. Roger Haylett introduced me to this, but few of the Jewish boys had interest, and although they came with me a couple of times, they thought it was not worth leaving the beach. Years later, I found a guy in our class, Barry Rabinowitz, also liked it and did it with a couple of the other Christians in our class. It just never came up. Early on, I told you this would not be simply viewing this through rose-colored glasses. There is a flip side that was present the whole time. The 800-pound gorilla in the room, we could not or would not see apartheid. In 1965, I spent my last night in South Africa on the lawns of Muizenberg Beach, arguing to let my colored friend John Abrams play on the putt-putt golf course. Didn't happen. Better known as Gonef, thief in Yiddish, or more pleasantly, sorry, there's one other picture I wanted to show, taken by Laura Derman years later, Sydney. And here he is. Now, you may look at that and not recognize him, but there are people who do recognize him, even at that age. Better known as Gonef, thief in Yiddish, or more pleasantly Leipke, he was spoken of in a previous session. However, I would like to tell the full story of the special man, a Muizenberg Beach icon with all its nuances, including the sequel. You will all remember him as the fruit vendor on Muizenberg Beach, but he had a name, Sydney. He spoke Yiddish before he could speak any other language. His mother worked as a maid in a house of a poorer Jewish woman. A lot of Jews in Muizenberg in the older areas were desperately poor. And Sydney learned Yiddish in that house because his mother, the maid, had learned it from her employer, and that was the language spoken. Ronnie Derman and Mervyn Rosenberg kept in touch with him throughout his life, and Mervyn would never fail to call him on Rosh Hashanah and often drive out to the rehabilitation home, he had become an addict, in which he lived on Rosh Hashanah and take him for a drive. When I arrived in 2009 on my one and only visit back to South Africa, Ronnie and Roger Haylett picked me up at the airport. Ronnie said, "You must call Leipke." We never called him Gonef, yet many people delighted in doing so. I called and said, "Hello, Leipke, this is Farrell." He said, "Farrell? How's your mother Anne and your father David? They went to Canada, didn't they? And your sister Valerie and your brother Jackie?" This was after not seeing them for almost 50 years. This man, sitting on the bed looking at you in the picture, the fruit vendor Leipke, put both his children through medical school, and they are both doctors. all he wanted in life was to be able to go to the Jewish old age home, but they wouldn't consider it. He's more of a Jew than I am. When the memories of Muizenberg played in Muizenberg, I think in the new Talmud Torah Hall, Mervyn picked up Sidney and brought him in as a guest. When Mervyn called Sidney a couple of years ago on Rosh Hashanah, he got no answer. He drove out to the rehabilitation home in Somerset West, I think, and Leibke had passed on. Nobody deserves to be more remembered and receive a tribute in this Remembering Muizenberg than Sidney, who was known and liked by more people than any other single person in my Muizenberg. In closing, and you're muted, but I can still imagine the sigh of relief that's going on, I would like to move from looking back to looking forward. My Muizenberg has gone and will never be again. That was a different world and a different time. Yet, like a phoenix, a new and Jewish Muizenberg seems to be rising from the proverbial ashes. This, I believe, is mainly due to those who stayed right here in Muizenberg or maintained flats here and didn't take off for other places the way people like I did. Bless them for doing that. And those that are coming back. But there also seems to be a spirit in the younger generation who are trying to create something special for those who are there. And I understand that the Hanukkah parties, Shabbat dinners, and all other events are well attended. And for that, we have to thank Rabbi Newfield. There are a series of these series of Zoom meetings are an example of it. When I came here in 2009, I visited the shul, but it was closed up building. Now it lives again. We had only 37 people in our 61 graduating class at Muizenberg High School, and many of them had emigrated by the time of our 50th reunion. But most of those came back for the reunion. I wonder what response a Muizenberg's reunion would command. Thank you for listening.
Well, thank you so much, Farrell. Well done. I understand why your name was chosen as Hope, because you left us with hope at the end, and your authentic voice and your cheerful stories just leave people with a warmth inside. So I want to thank you so much, and especially waking up in Wisconsin. I have one or two comments myself, and then I'm going to open it up to the floor if anyone has any questions for you. First of all, just to give you an idea of what's going on in Muizenberg at the moment, about a month ago, we had our first Friday night dinner post-COVID, which the room next to the synagogue, which is where we could have dinner, I was told can only host 60 people. I put out the flyer and we had 40 people in the first 4 hours. And by the end of 24 hours, we had 75 people at the dinner. So we packed the room to capacity. That's just an idea of the interest of people feel that they want to give something to the Jewish community here. And I want everyone around the world to know that it's not the hub of the 1950s, I assure you that. But at the same time, there's a very good vibe going on with people being interested in Judaism and coming back to being part of a Jewish community. Likewise, you mentioned the Hanukkah party. So the Hanukkah party obviously is in December, so we have a lot of Johannesburgers. But the Johannesburgers who were here were only about 1/3 of the event. We had close to 300 people at the Hanukkah party. And the Johannesburgers who were here mentioned to me they wish they had parties like that in Johannesburg. It was just such an amazing vibe. So Farrell, thank you for wishing us that blessing. And you are always invited. And please don't wait another 40, 50 years to visit Muizenberg again. because you are always
Remembering Muizenberg.
invited. And thank you for coming. I'm going to now go to anyone else who wants to comment or ask a question to Farrell. Just please unmute yourself and just say your name so that I can make you the spotlight as well. Anyone want to say anything? Otherwise, we'll go on. I know that some of the questions often come at the end. Does anyone want to comment on anything that Farrell said? Otherwise, I'm going to go straight into the next speaker. Gone. Okay, so we'll come back to that. But Farrell, again, once so much. Thank you so much. Hedy, you're next. Your name doesn't really need an introduction. For those of you on Google out there, you must know that Hedy Davis wrote the book Muizenberg Shtetl by the Sea. It was a sellout. It's been, now you can buy it secondhand on various means for 10 times the asking price originally. So it's become somewhat of a collector's piece. Hedy has a lot of different, Hedy still comes to Muizenberg every year. I should say that as well. So Hedy, look forward to seeing you in December. And hopefully you'll be here for the centenary as well. And Hedy had a whole slew of different ideas to talk about, but we zoned in on the trains, talking about the role of trains to Muizenberg. In her day, I'm not sure, before her day, after her day, I'm not sure. I know that my children love the train still today. We take it more as a event of allowing the children to experience a train more than using it to get between places. But Hedy, thank you so much for being here. I'm going to make you the spotlight. I'm going to take the spotlight away from Farrell, and then you should be the main view of everybody. So thank you for being here.
Thank you for inviting me again. Last year, I spoke under such strange circumstances. I can't even remember what I spoke about. Oh, I've just seen my friend Jean. I was happy to talk about the trains because in the 500 memoirs, there must be 400 in which the trains are mentioned and in which the importance of the train to people was mentioned. And people loved writing about their own experiences in the train. And I found it quite fascinating. Well, you all know the prior history. There was ox wagons outspanned in front of where the shul is, and an inn with thatch roof, and the herders would sleep there. And the ox wagons went through to Simonstown, and that was the way one got across. Rhodes was the one who stopped in Muizenberg and made it quite an important place. The new Cork Bay railway line reached Muizenberg in 1882, which was 2 years after Isidor Hirsch had first arrived there. Now, even the oldest Muizenbergers don't remember Isidor Hirsch. He had left by 95, 96. And he was, honestly, the first person to see the potential. And he took this little inn, which stood afterwards became the Grand Hotel, and he made a beautiful hotel. And then across the road where the Marine stood, he made a second hotel. So he was important. When the first train reached Muizenberg, 2 years after Isidor Hirsch had bought the Farmer Peck's Inn in December 82, the steam engine traveled on a single track, arrived in Muizenberg, and you'll see photo number 1 that I've put up because I couldn't get a photograph of the train itself. Oh, there's the train. All you could see was smoke. And you can see the dirt road on the right-hand side, and you can see how close to the sea the railway line was. It was a steam engine train, and that smoke was a cloud that filled the air. Thank you, Rabbi. The front of the first train was decorated with flags and a huge banner that read Farmer Peck's, the inn which Hirsch had bought. The front of the first train One newspaper reported, the smart host of the well-known Muizenberg Hotel is no doubt entitled to the very graceful railway introduction. It had a huge banner, and the one side said Farmer Picks. I have seen a photograph of it, and I've been searching all week and I can't find it. It's somewhere in one of these cupboards. On the weekend, the price of a ticket from Cape Town to Muizenberg return cost 2 shillings and 6pence, which for some was money, but for a lot of people, 2 shillings and 6pence was not all that much money. And it remained the same price, strangely, for many, many decades. Tens of thousands of local day trippers could have access to the sea, whereas previously only people who owned horses and traps could visit Muizenberg regularly. Picnic baskets could be ordered from Rosa Hirsch, and it was just a beautiful place to spend a Sunday. The first station was a standard government building which had limited facilities. Photo number 2, please, Rabbi. I think you all know this photograph. Number 2. But this is people waiting to go home. And look at them. On Sunday, they came to the beach in these long white dresses, the ladies and the men with tie and jacket. And these people had all spent the day at the beach. And now look at them standing there, waiting and waiting for the single train that would come. You see a few houses in the background. You see the stone building of the behind where the railway line station actually stood. Thank you. Within 30 years, the beach at Muizenberg had become so popular that it was necessary to lay down a double track. And an elegant new railway station had been commissioned. Photo 3. Doesn't that look grand? We wish it looked like that still to this day. And that poor clock up there. I think it's like on 3 o'clock on all 4 sides, but nothing's changed. It's the same building. Thank you. At first, there were no stops between Wynberg and Muizenberg, and the trains were known as Muizenberg Flyers because of the fast journeys, and the name Muizenberg would become the beloved of holidaymakers from Cape Town and the far hinterland. The elaborate Georgian railway station. I must just point out to Muizenbergers, you keep on telling me that the wonderful concrete pavilion that you miss so much was, I don't know what. It was Georgian. It was built in the same era as the railway station. And it's quite interesting if you compare the 2 buildings as such. The staidness of this particular building and then the concrete building, it did have a flair. It really did have a flair. I'd be the first one to admit it, but it was too heavy for the stilts it was sighted on. Anyway, the elaborate railway station, photo number 4, please, Rabbi. Turned out like that. I mean, it looks very glamorous in the architect's drawing. It still looks glamorous standing there. You see the pedestrian bridge for crossing, which I think was a jolly good idea. Today, people have to wait for the gates to open and close, and sometimes they don't, and sometimes they do. Thank you. Not everyone loved the old locomotives, however, polluting the air from the coal-powered engines which spread this dirt into the air far and wide. At the turn of the last century, Sammy Marks came to Muizenberg for the first time. And he was so taken, he saw a very large house on Rhodesia Street and bought it as a bargain, and he named it Hatherley. The idea was that the family would live there during the Anglo-Boer War in a secure village away from the fighting taking place around his own home in Pretoria, you do know that he helped the Boers on the one side and then he ran over the other side and helped the British. Very long house. His wife found the entrance very unattractive, this house, Hatherley. So Marx asked the architect, Herb Baker, to make a little improvement. And when she came down to live there, she was horrified. Now there was a driveway large enough to turn a wagon drawn by a span of oxen. The house itself was situated parallel to the railway line, and the smoke from the train was simply intolerable. So they planted a row of trees along the fence to screen the house. When Marx was eventually persuaded by his wife to sell the house, it was impossible to get rid of it. So the family was stuck with her house for another 2 decades. Eventually, a developer would turn the house into a rabbit warren of small flats and named the block Samenkost. And here the story continues. I decided I'm going to let my memoirs speak. Louise van Gelderen Chain wrote many years later. I have vague memories of the small unit my grandparents rented in Samenkost, Rhodesia Street. I used to go there after school every day. It was a lovely place to play with winding pathways and a garden. I could conjure up imaginary fairies and pixies and play there for hours. The back entrance of the complex was onto a shaded grove of trees alongside the railway line. I loved that grove. It was like a mini forest to a small child. And then came Doffy Lazarus. Some of you have been reading what her son had to say, but Doffy had a voice of her own, and she did a most superb interview with us. It's hours long. We were in Muizenberg in the time of World War I. We were in a place called St. Elmo in Hanson Road, corner Fraser Road, and my grandmother was running a sort of boarding house, and she had annexes. I asked for information about the grandmother, and they all the grandchildren said, no, we didn't have a great-grandmother. Doffy was our grandmother, but we have no knowledge of her mother. We found it, and I found her. The wounded men of World War I used to be farmed out, she said. We would billet them, and they came in their hospital blues with bandages and crutches. Those were the days of no electricity. Who needed electricity? No electric trains. There were puffs, you know. Steam engines. Photo number 5, please, Rabbi. I can't remember if there were a lot of Jews then, but subsequently, yes. I'm sorry about the picture, but you have to see it. This is the single railway line going across a lake in Lakeside. That puff of cloud that you see at the end of it, that's the smoke from the train. And that would stay for hours. Just look at the corrugated paneling they put underneath the train to support it. My goodness, I would have been petrified. Now she tells a funny story. Thank you. We used to go to Star of the Sea Convent when we were little girls, and we had to catch the train, the puff train. Including our cousins, there were 10 of us, and I was the eldest. I was responsible. We used to have the season tickets round our necks on a string. There were separate compartments in the train. You had to open the door and get in and out again from the corridor. We had a much better idea. We climbed in and out through the windows. That's what we used to do. There was one cousin who was a little bit plump, and she got stuck in the window, and she went on to Cork Bay. Well, I was in for it. My father said, "What's it going to be? The slipper, the strap, the brush, or the hand?" Whichever one it was going to be awful. Yes, we used to get on that puff and sit there and do our homework or embroidery on the journey. Transport was very reliable. I had to mention Agatha Christie, especially for the surfers here. The thing I enjoyed most in Cape Province was the bathing. Whenever we could steal time off, we took the train and went to Muizenberg, got out our surfboards and went surfing. In The Man in the Brown Suit, it's a work of detective fiction published by Agatha Christie. in 1924. The heroine of the novel, Anne Bedingfield, follows several suspicious persons from England to South Africa. They leave Cape Town. She leaves Cape Town by train. She travels to Muizenberg for what she anticipates as a recreational interlude. I caught a fast train to Muizenberg and got there in about half an hour. It was a nice trip. We wound slowly round the base of Table Mountain, and some of the flowers were very lovely. My geography was very weak. I never realized that Cape Town is on a peninsula. Consequently, I was rather surprised on getting out of the train to find myself facing the sea once more. And there was some perfectly entrancing bathing going on. The people had short curved boards and came floating in on the waves. Anybody remember those short curved boards, the brown ones that some of us would envy other people having? So, there was the train and there was the surfboards. I have to talk about my ballerwastas because I think I raised quite a lot of love amongst my readers because I mentioned them in the book. In the 20s and 30s, many refugees arrived in Cape Town from Lithuania, Courland, or Europe in general, and all they had was a small suitcase of luggage, very little by way of cash, young children holding hands tightly. Although there may have been someone at the foot of the gangplank of the ship to welcome these Jews, offering them a small amount of money, advice on where to stay if they had no relatives in the country, there was no ways they could afford to settle in what we today call the city bowl. Their best bet, they might be advised, was to take the train, which cost very little money, travel to Muizenberg, and they might find a place where they could afford to board. Even better, widows might find somewhere they could work, in a boarding house or a small guest house. And yes, many of them would go on to become owners of a small boarding house in town. One of my dearest correspondents, Nina Herbstein-Zelbst, would write about her father, the first Jew to be called to the bench in the Cape, Judge Herbstein. He caught the train to Cape Town and walked to his chambers at 4 Wales Street every morning about 8 o'clock. The train took 40 minutes. It was comfortable, not too crowded, and of course, segregated. At that time, by custom rather than by force of law. There was a first class, a second class, and a third class compartment. And you could travel in whichever one you chose to. And the poorer people would be in compartment 3. I'm sure the judge traveled in compartment 1. And I'm sure students traveled in the second part of the train. I imagine he read, says Nina, I imagine he read the Cape Times, the morning newspaper, or looked through a brief. Joan Aronowitz was another Muizenberger. She spent her whole life there. In 1928, I attended the kindergarten school run by Mrs. Simpson in the wooden iron hall behind the Anglican Church in Church Road. Soon afterwards, my family decided to send me to the Good Hope Seminary in Cape Town. I traveled to town by steam train, then took a tram car to the seminary in Hope Street. In the afternoon, I had to return to Muizenberg by the same means. I didn't have very much time for anything but my homework. Ruth Berman Bordelais wrote, she also had to travel to school, but it was only as far as Wynberg. In all, it took more than an hour to get there. She worked it out from where she stayed. A 15-minute walk from our house to the station, a 25-minute train ride, and then another 20-minute walk to the school. Well, my friends and I had a system whereby we would share the homework load. On the way home, we decided who would do which subject. In the morning, traveling to school, we'd switch exercise books and copy from one another. Teachers are so stupid, they never noticed. This was a great time saver and guaranteed we wouldn't miss the train in the morning. Phyllis Friedlander, my dear friend. Standard 1, I went to Weinberg Girls because my mother wanted me to learn to be a lady. Well, I think we can all agree Phyllis is a lady. We went to school by train every day, which was wonderful because we used to sit and do our homework on the train. And now she describes an incident. A resident of Simonstown, Just Nuisance, the mascot of the Navy, was a famous dog who rode the Simonstown to Cape Town train on a daily basis. I think some of you know who I'm talking about. This was a dog that stood higher than the desk next to me. This was wartime, and I remember he used to come into the train and make his way to the nearest sailors. On one occasion, he fancied the seat where a friend and I sat, and he got onto the back of the seat and he nuzzled until he'd pushed his way on, and we had to stand while Just Nuisance lay the full length on the train seat. I remember Just Nuisance very well indeed. His statue can be found in Simonstown today. There were other stories about Just Nuisance, and Margaret Nachman, her parents, I think, ran the Victoria Hotel. Soldiers and sailors were billeted there, and some simply came there to drink. Just Nuisance was a regular visitor there as well. Often he would come into the bar, or sometimes the lounge, and stay until it was time for the sailors to go back to Simonstown and accompany them, especially if they'd had too much to drink. He would shepherd them across the railway track and make sure they got home to their lodgings in Simonstown safely. I have this from a sailor I once met who told me he had no recollection of how he got back to the digs in Simonstown. But it was the dog. The dog actually protected these people all the way to exactly where they stayed. There was another lovely, famous resident of Muizenberg, and that was, you all know, Benjamin Bennett. He was news editor of the Cape Argus. He lived in Muizenberg most of his professional life. He wrote 23 books. On an old Remington, Bob wrote, there's an urban legend that he wrote these stories and books on the train journey to and from Cape Town every day. But he adds, to my knowledge, he spent the 30-odd minutes sitting there with the opposition Cape Times and a pencil in hand, during which he would mark news items that deserved follow-ups for the day. So half his work was done before he got to the office. In the morning, Some Don't Hang. Can you see it? Whoops. It's got a ghastly picture on the cover. This is the book that details the story of Bubble Schroeder. You know, that very famous murder here in Johannesburg. But Some Don't Hang also tells the tragic story of Amy Schneider, the Muizenberger. The elderly will all remember her wonderful bagels on a Sunday morning. She had a little fish shop in Church Street. She was a typical Yiddish mama, says Bennett. And she would bake wonderful bagels. He wrote about her with great affection. Her murder was deeply tragic, and the guy got off scot-free, and then he got involved in something else, and then, well, the book is entitled Some Don't Hang. Ethel Bloch wrote to me. Oh no, this was an interview that I did. This was one of my balabosters, her mother. Fegalea Kosovo, the great Imperial Hotel balaboster, would go to Cape Town every month by train and then walk all the way to the Longstreet Baths mikveh. She had a thin booklet that she took with her everywhere, and Ethel didn't know what this book was about. It was called Tekinas. It disappeared when she died, and they had no idea. The Tekinas was a collection of personal penitentiary prayers in Yiddish, mostly for women, that she would recite in the train, and as she recited them, tears would stream down her face. It's quite amazing to think this tough lady who had been through so much, never wasted a moment of her life. And there she is on the train, praying and weeping, the tears just rolling. There were happier memories. Beryl Baldwin wrote about the early 1950s when she was old enough to go by train on her own with her friends to the snake park in Muizenberg. Every Sunday morning, we took turns to phone the police station in Muizenberg to inquire about the weather, and the policeman on duty was usually very obliging. Now, if the weather was fine, we would phone change one another. So one person, you knew who to phone. And we would all meet, please, can we have the photograph? It's the last photograph, number 6, Rabbi. But it's not a very good photograph, I'm afraid. But for those who, you can see it. The clock at the top, that's where they used to meet under the clock. Now, a lot of people didn't meet under the clock because it's a bit further back from the little model train. A lot of people met at the model train. You had your spot. This is the great foyer of the because we've enlarged it so much, it's come a bit out of focus. But you'd be there at 10 o'clock on the dot, and you'd all go together to Muizenberg. I think this was ridiculous, phoning the police. I mean, they got to Muizenberg, they ran from the train down to the snake park where there wasn't a breath of wind. Who needed a weather report for that? It was permanently wonderful in the snake park. You didn't need a weather report. And then comes something much more touching. It was the Bickerholm camps in Lakeside. Quite a few people had written to me. They had one visit to Muizenberg in their entire lives until they grew up. And that was the trip on the Bickerholm camp to Muizenberg. Today, it's not called the Bickerholm camp anymore. We've given it another name so that the children don't feel like it's a charity. In fact, they don't actually have to go to the camp in Lakeside. They have a choice of any camp they want to go to that they prefer. And yet it's the first camp that's always filled every year. First is the one in Lakeside. The train would bring the children from Johannesburg. Can you just imagine the excitement on the train? It might have been the only time in their childhood that they actually went to Lakeside. It was in walking distance of the beach in Muizenberg, and on Shabbos to the little shul. Boys who were of bar mitzvah age were called to the Torah, and at the brocha, usually 400 people, including visitors from up country, the bar mitzvah lads were made honored guests to feel the importance of their occasion. And we mustn't forget those who came from beyond the borders of the Union of South Africa, those who came from the Rhodesias, those who came from the Belgian Congo. Leonard Weinreich describes the best memory of Sephardi Jews who. Do you want me to stop, Rama?
I don't know. Keep going. I don't think anyone's talking.
I think I don't know. I'm not that far from the end. The description of the Sephardi Jews who had fled the Nazi invasion of Rhodos, and the only place in the world that they could be accepted was in Belgian Congo, now Angola. And when the Congolese summer hit its sweaty peak, they'd climb aboard a train that took 5 days and several nights to get to Muizenberg. No showers, no baths, average temperature 103. Eventually, they would arrive in Cape Town, where they would catch the suburban line to climb out at Muizenberg into the teeth of the southeaster from Antarctica. Nothing was sweeter. There was another more blasé comment from one Esme Benet, who I believe is very influential in Canada. When I was about 11, I started going I started going to Muizenberg with my father, just the two of us. We would go in the blue train, a luxury express with everything decked out in blue. Sheets, blankets, and towels. We shared a blue leather compartment with its own blue washroom. And then it made its descent. We would dine elegantly in the dining room, sitting on blue banquettes and eating off blue table linen. The blue train was electrified, but as it approached the mountain range, it was hitched to a steam train to pull it over the passes, and it made its descent into Cape Town. In Cape Town, we switched to the local train, which would take us to Muizenberg and to our accommodation. She adds, my father stayed at the somewhat better Bayview Hotel. I don't know, better hotel? And then there was my own experience. In 1959, I was so lucky, I landed a holiday job as a receptionist at the Esplanade Hotel, diagonally opposite the Snake Park, or Snake Pit, depending on whether you're a born Muizenberger or not. Now, why on earth would any fun-loving varsity student want to spend a holiday working in the musty interior of a boarding house type of institution surrounded by aging folk? The hours were inordinately long because I had to leave home at 6 o'clock, cycle 2-3 kilometers to the railway station, lock my bike with a chain to a pole on the station in the hope it would still be there at 6:30 in the evening, endure a bumpy, I never found these trains comfortable, endure a bumpy 35-minute train ride to get to Muizenberg at 7, and woe was me if I was a minute late. In the evening, I left at 6 p.m. and I got home exhausted by 7 o'clock if I was lucky. The great benefit was not the pay of 27 Rand per month from which I had to pay my train fare, or the free meals I could take in a quiet corner of the dining room, but the 2 precious hours off between 2 and 4 p.m. The owner, Mrs. Rosentusam, Mrs. Ehrlich, ran a strictly kosher hotel, the Esplanade, which during the...
Related to Israel.
Yeah, 94, eh?
Yeah,
Sorry.
keep going.
During the season, every year, the same clientele came, year in, year out. In some ways, I daily stepped back in time to a world that existed for a exclusive few aging Lithuanian-born Jews from Johannesburg and the outlying villages, such as Bethel, Klerksdorp, Krugersdorp, wherever they had settled in the early part of the 20th century. For the most part, they spoke Yiddish, a language which I had never heard before spoken. And because of my own German background, I was quite able to communicate with them, and I got on very well with them. For 2 or 3 weeks, depending on their finances, this is how they would spend their holidays at the coast. Annually, they made the Great Trek, as they called it. It was the Great Trek from the hinterland to Muizenberg, which in its heyday was the beach resort of choice for all who could afford it. They came by train, a journey which entailed at least 1 or 2 nights, depending on whether they were booked on the fast train or the slow train. From there, they took the suburban line, which an hour later would deposit them on Muizenberg station. As they stepped out of the train, this was everybody did the same thing. I mean, it was amazing to see them at the station. One could hear people taking deep breaths of air. The wonderful fresh sea breeze would hit their nostrils, and eventually out came the compliment. And what was that? The Luft, der Luft, der Luft. That is what they came to Muizenberg for. I've done the same thing myself from Cinnabar, stick my head out of the door and I've got out of the window and I've got der Luft. It's wonderful. There were porters on the platform to assist passengers with their heavy trunks. But Mrs. Rosen, aware of her client's imminent arrival, would send her helper. Small staff, a man had a special hat, It said on it Esplanade, and off he went with a trolley. And they would stroll back together to the hotel, the luggage rattling precariously balanced on the trolley. All the while, the anxious holiday maker calling out, "Careful, be careful." And to the poor man, who, if he was lucky, would be rewarded with a couple of pennies for his trouble. At the beginning and end of the 6-week school holiday, there was also a special connection made at Belleville, bringing the Joburg train directly to Muizenberg, to the great delight of those who were lucky enough to get a seat on it. I had to finish with this comment from Joan Aronovitz. I'm thinking that any story of Muizenberg will inevitably span many continents and many eras. Just think, in 30 times, we will be the antiquities who are being remembered.
Hedy Davis, thank you so much. Delightful and informative as usual. Before I go to comment on both presentations, I'd like to remind everybody that we do have a centenary celebration at the end of the year. For those who joined late, we are going large for 8 days from the 28th of December to the 4th of January. We're going to be having events on a grand scale, and I encourage everyone from Cape Town, Johannesburg, and overseas to come, Farrell, as you said, to a reunion of note, probably one of the largest reunions since the heyday of Muizenberg, and that's what we're trying to recreate. I will first of all say, if anyone is not on the list, the databases which receive the newsletters to tell you what's going on, as well as the links for the Zooms, as well as the flyers, please write out to muizenberg.shul@gmail.com so that I can put you, just put join, Muizenberg.shul or Muizenberg period or point or full stop, however you call it, muizenberg.shul@gmail.com, and you will be added to that list. I'll start off with Farrell. I'm just going to highlight everybody, add spotlight to myself, and Farrell, I'll add you as a spotlight as well if people want to comment. I'll start off with you, Farrell. So you talked about they may not have had money, but you had the tan. And I'll say I might not be living in the Sydney and earning the Australian dollar, but I do have a good tan for a rabbi. I assure you that much. For the winter surf, I am out there. Second of all, bringing Mervyn into the picture, when we talk about pins on rabbis' seats, I don't know what I would do if someone put a pin on my seat, but I will tell you that the only pins that are being put at the Muizenberg shul are by the rabbi to wake the congregants up when I speak. So they better be aware of that. Thankfully, I do love them very much. Just making a little bit of a joke about that, just reminding everyone of Farrell's talk in case they want to comment about that. Hedy, getting on to you about the train with a corrugated iron picture. I didn't even realize that when I saw the picture that it had corrugated iron. Thankfully now, as we know, there's a brand new train system. It's the blue train. The old one is the yellow train. I have been in it before. I know that other people like myself with young children like to show the train system to their children, even if they live in Constantia, and even if we have no use of the train. I myself never have a use for the train, but it's always beautiful to go from at least the False Bay station to the Cork Bay station. It only takes 5 minutes, and then all the children love it. So it is still being used at some level, even if it's for recreation. Lastly, the name of the camp from Bikur Cholim was changed to Camp Kesher. And I will tell you from firsthand experience, because we actually had our birthday party for my children at the Camp Kesher with, 100 people, 50 kids, and it was such a delight. And as you know, Hedy, those children come in December still to the synagogue. And when they do come, I think that Shabbat that they were there, one of the Shabbases was 250 people at the least. I know that I had 4 sushi platters, each with, how many was it? Like 100 or 200 pieces. They went in 10 minutes. I had no sushi when they were there with the Johannesburgers and the locals. 600 pieces of sushi went in 5 minutes. So just to give you an idea, they do still come and we love having them. And thankfully that Camp Kesher is still visiting us. So thank you for mentioning that. I'll now go to the audience. If anyone wants to say anything, please just unmute yourself. I know that Jackie or Mervyn wants to say something, so I'm going to ask to unmute. And I know that we've got quite a few comments saying wonderful presentations to both of you. Mervyn, I'm going to make you a spotlight. And please say something. Please say what you want. Yeah.
I just want to tell you, which Farrell failed to mention, is that Farrell suffers from a condition called arachnophobia, to the extent that he wrote a poem about the spider. The spider came and leaps and bounds, his beady eyes agleam. The little boy began to run, his voice a gargled scream. He got into the garden gate, but there he was squashed flat. The spider pounced upon him and squashed him like a gnat. The gardener did not chance to see the spider lurking near. He grabbed it out and dragged him to his lair. With vicious blow of heel and toe, the gardener soon broke free. It was for naught, he was recaught and joined the boy of 3. Farrell wrote that when he was in standard 6 or standard 7.
Wow. Wow. Well, Farrell, you're not just a pretty face, I see. Wow. Well done. And I will tell you, my wife is a biologist and she picks up spiders with her hands. Matter of fact, we were on the airplane recently to Johannesburg and there was a spider hanging in the airplane. And somebody notified the air hostess that there was a spider. And my wife just got up and said, oh, no problem. And she took it in her hand and she put it somewhere where no one would get to. So maybe she can help you, Farrell. But beautiful. Now, Mervyn, do you remember that poem or do you have it in front of you? It looked like you knew it off by heart almost.
I remember it.
Mervyn has always been able to recite that poem, to my amazement. You know, the fact is, I think anyone growing up in South Africa should have arachnophobia because your spiders look like this, you know. But I did see it in an advertisement in the US for people to get rid of spiders of the house in their house, and it actually had my poem there with my name under that. I have no idea where someone in Tennessee got hold of the poem and put it on the advertisements.
Well, I think that brings to light the expression, he's a poet and he doesn't know it. Yeah. Thank you, Farrell. That's great. Fantastic. And also as well, I've got a comment here from Jasmine Hope. He passed the arachnophobia, I think, to the next generation. I didn't read the whole thing. But yeah, he grew up in Canada. Very interesting talks, both Farrell and Hedy. Thank you for that, Mervyn. Anyone else want to comment? Just say your name so that I can make you big. Otherwise, we'll just close off the session. Anyone else want to comment on any of the talks? Maybe mention some of your experiences going on the train. Did anyone see anything interesting while you were on the train, while you were growing up? You're welcome to comment on that, as well as anything else that Farrell spoke about. Anyone want to say anything? You just have to unmute yourself so that I know that you are there. Ask all to unmute. Anyone want to say anything? Okay, if there's nothing to be said, then I think we'll close it at that. Do I hear something?
Can I just
okay?
Can I just
say,
say,
Hedy and Farrell, maybe just a closing comments from each of you, and I'll start off with ladies first. Hedy, please.
I just want to say a special hello to Jean. I see Jean, and I'm just so happy to see you. And just keep well. And thank you all for being so kind to me.
I would say,
sorry. Yeah, Farrell, go for it.
I would just like to close by saying, when I came in 2009, everybody had discovered Fishhook as the beach to go to. And you know, that's absolutely ridiculous.
No. They were rivals of Muizenberg. We had wanted nothing to do with the fishing people.
Yes. There's no question. But that's what people were telling me. You have to go to Fishhook. That's the beach today. And that seems to have disappeared. I don't think anyone really could possibly prefer Fishhook's little strip of beach to, Muizenberg's magnificent beach.
Well, thank you. You've got a couple of chuckles in the background. I'll end off by saying thank you to both of you. If you look at who the people come to Muizenberg Synagogue today, even on a small Friday night, I'm always amazed by the scope of community from different places. And I often mention it in synagogue. We have people coming from Simonstown, Fishhook, Glencairn, Noordhoek, Pommekie, Marina de Gama, Lakeside, Muizenberg, Kirstenhof, and even as far as Constantia. So that just gives you an idea of when you don't have 600 Jewish families, or however many Jewish families there were in Muizenberg in the heyday, but we do attract a lot of people from a lot of different places. And that always makes life interesting because it's all different people with different experiences and ideas of living from different places. So I just wanted to share that, just so you can appreciate what you will come and see when you come and attend the centenary end of year, if you are so lucky. Thank you, Farrell. Enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you, Hedy. Enjoy the rest of your evening. And to all of you who made this call, thank you so much. It will be available, the recording, in a few days' time, always before the next one. Every week we are having interesting speakers with different topics. And next week, Wednesday, will be I'm sure it will be as good as the one today, which was fantastic. And last week was amazing as well. If you didn't watch it, it is on YouTube on the Muses channel. Thank you again, and God bless you all. See you next week.
Stay